which means China is taking advantage of competing in that market, importing more product, exporting more product, and consumers are responding positively. They have no alternative. But industries in the market have no alternative rather to accept. That's why we need now to support innovative initiatives that will help in the competitiveness of our market. That's Kenya market now. And it depends on which product. Later on, we'll see the product that are competing in our market. Uganda market, composition and growth of exporters. India is leading. And if you find the person or the country which is leading in exporting that market, you also need to find the product that they're exporting and try to think as a country of how you can also compete with that country. But it seems there is a weakness somewhere where we don't have to look at factors that hinder us not to compete with others. We may call them problematic factors. Those problematic factors are being developed for personal interest. Problematic factors are there for purpose. Problematic factors are resistant, and you can't understand why they are still resistant. Who is responsible to go and point out these are problematic factors for this government, and we need to pull them down? No one is responsible. We look at them. That's Tanzania market composition and growth of exporters. We also have to look at the import share of product before and after the CET implementation. You can see that the capital goods in 2003, this is before the implementation of the CET, was down, but in 2012, the product share has also maintained a certain level. That's Rwanda import share, Kenya import share, Tanzania import share of product or capital goods. I'm talking about capital goods, consumer goods, intermediate goods, and raw material based on the rate that were assigned on those goods. Uganda import share. Now, after that, you can come up to the import share of GDP. How much those sectors contribute to the growth of the GDP. 2013, 2012, compared to 5 years old ago, 5 years ago. You see the difference. Tanzania is getting a minus 7.55. Uganda, there is a reason for that. If you look at the Competition Policy and Act and send contribution increased competitiveness, the Competition Act was, Competition Policy and the Competition Act were designed purposely to protect local manufacturers. But how are these enforced to support local manufacturers? Have we implemented the Competition Policy and Act which work at the level of EAC, or each country is using its own? That's one of the challenges that we're having now. Same to industrialization policy, which was approved in 2010, and yet they're still moving around to implement it. When do we expect to be industrialized countries? Is it a problem of funding to implement the industrialization policy or what? You see, all those policies and whatever have a side effect on other production and manufacturers. If we decide to implement the policy, the association policy, then we can move forward and see how changes would reflect on our trade. Now, look at products that are being exported in various countries and their contribution in total percentage. Product, minerals, fuels, and whatever. You see, we have countries that exploit minerals, but those minerals are exported again, that produce minerals, but those minerals are exported to other countries. They add value on those minerals and bring them back to those countries and sell them, meaning they are originating from those countries. Still, we don't follow up. We do accept those ones. We have no alternative. It's because we have left our borders open and things are going. That's Burundi product import. What is coming in, at what percentage? Kenya, Rwanda, and so forth. Now look at the problematic factors that our government needs to support us, that we need to work on and see how they can help us or be linked with a common external tariff so that we can have something, so that they can improve our competitiveness and they can support in alleviating poverty. Access to financing in Burundi was ranked as 19.8. What does it mean? Those are the responses, percentage of responses. There's no access to financing. That's why you cannot produce this product which can compete in other markets. Now we have to keep quiet. We have no alternative. There's no access to financing. I want to produce Matchbox, which is coming from China, so that I can compete with Chinese. But I've gone to the bank. I want money, but I can't get money. Those are the issues. If you can see your toothpicks in your country being exported by Chinese or whatever, think about it. Why do they export in your country? Does it mean that you don't have money to have somewhere where you can produce your own toothpicks to compete with those ones, with the quality and grade? Let's conclude that the common external tariff has a positive impact on government revenue because EAC countries are trying, they're working hard based on the rates that they assigned on product. But on the side of competitiveness, somehow the rates that were assigned on the product are not supporting the competitiveness of our manufacturing industry. Let's agree on that. And thirdly, if you look at the poverty line, what are the measures that were taken that the poverty, the special rates that were assigned on the common external tariff as a common external tariff favor poor population? For instance, we have poor population that sell juice. And we have some juices, packet juice that in form of powder that are coming from outside. These are just one example. But the poor population tend to use the powder and mix with water and add value and do whatever and go and sell it somewhere. That's what they're getting. Sugar. They're making ice cream just to get something to survive. Did we sit down and think of the rate that can support those products that poor population may afford to buy them or have them? The answer can be yes or not. You know it. Why is it taking long for poverty alleviation rate to come down? It's because we don't have measures on our initiatives and our policies that we have introduced to support those areas. What should we recommend then? Let's recommend that we may have special rates. Like we are saying, government says we have products that are for revenue purpose, like cement and whatever, to increase revenue to a certain rate. And secondly, let's have rates that will support competitiveness of our local and manufacturing sectors. That's on the side of rate. On the side, thirdly, let's have the rate that will support poor population to afford to buy certain product. Like if you increase the rate on books, that even a poor family need a book or whatever to go to school. If the poor family cannot afford, who will support that one? You as government, you don't do that. Medication, we don't look at that. But we only look at those ones on revenue. We say, no, we have to charge it heavily. But we have to think about the poor population. Now, on the income that we are receiving from the import of goods in our countries, let me give you an example. You can't believe. Last month, I imported a Legacy. I paid a tax of 4,700,000 Tanzania shillings. I went with a friend. My friend also imported a Nissan, which he paid 7 million T shillings. How much is that for only two of us? More than 11 millions. If a ship comes in at the port, it carries about 1,800 vehicles for locals. 1,800. How much is that charged for all those vehicles? Where is that money going? Can someone be accountable for the expenses of that money? But that one is imported based on the common external tariff that EAC countries agreed that this is the much for 8 years, we are going to charge this much. And 11 years, we're going to charge this much. Why can't they pick that amount of money, certain percentage of it, even 1% or 0.5%, and support any initiatives or program that will help private sectors in their competitiveness with other exporters? Why not? Is that difficult? I know you can't say yes, you are from government. Secondly, we can have 0.5% and allocate it to implement what? Poverty alleviation initiatives every year. This is much we got from the common external tariff. You go in a village, you implement a project, you tell them, okay, based on the regional integration, this is the much that we got on the common external tariff. Now, we have to implement it. Who may not be thankful? Any poor man. That is the fruit of the regional integration. Jumuiya ya Afrika Mashariki ndio inaleta hii pesa. Oh, safi sana. Thank you very much.
I would like to invite Dr. Josephat Kweka, who is to be the discussant. Kindly summarize your comments in 5 minutes, which I'm sure you should be able to do.
The EAC partner states signed the ECET, as well as bilateral trade agreements with the rest of the world. So again, here we are seeing the impact of CET, but also impact of the bilateral trade agreements with the rest of the world, all lumped together. The author has used various methodologies, and the question is asking is whether, what does this mean to poverty reduction? The third point I take from the paper is that the CET has had positive impact in terms of increased imports and import duty revenue, And this largely come from the growth of bilateral trade, and so no effect on tariff rates as far as the evaluation, his evaluation of CET is concerned. And particularly, the growth of bilateral trade actually increased systematically. My concern, or rather issues, or maybe recommendation, are threefold. First one, I think the paper need to discuss a bit about the efficacy and the credibility of the CET, because in practice, there are some questionable application. For instance, in the case of abuse of safeguard measures, like those application of stay, there are cases of rice and sugar imports, very cheap one, through maybe Tanzania, and they make it to the neighboring countries. And so this one distorts the incentive for the local producers. And so here, I think we need to be very firm in recommending specifically to promote CET reviews. And that's where trademark, I'm sure, could do a lot of good. The second question or concern or recommendation is to understand to what extent the business community have actually leveraged CET. I'm not too sure, because the author is trying to discuss competitiveness impact, and we need to know how industrial policy actually interact with trade policy. And those effects can be seen either at business community level or at government revenue level. And finally, there are quite analytical issues that I will request the author to improve this understanding, much as this subject is really very critical for the business of TMEA and ESC at large. First of all, attribution effects. How do we attribute all these effects to CET? The second one is the link between government revenue in terms of all these import duties to poverty reduction. I mean, first of all, trademark cannot venture there. We really don't know. It's a bit messy. So it's a difficult linkage to establish, although empirics regressions can do that. And the thirdly is exactly to add a bit of nuances on how CET actually is reflected when designing industrial and trade policy, either by individual partner states or ESC Secretariat at large. Thank you very much.
I find the comparison a bit difficult in the sense that EAC has already had a common external tariff that's been in place for some time. And we are comparing it with West Africa or ECOWAS, which is to come into effect in 2015. To me, it would seem that ECOWAS has more to learn from EAC than EAC from ECOWAS. And essentially what should be understood is that the EAC common external tariff was a deliberately set. There were categories that were identified for raw materials, intermediate products, raw materials, and capital equipment. Rates were allocated knowing with a trade policy objective in mind. There was discussion on how you dealt with special products. They were called sensitive products then. And it was a question of saying where you want additional protection, what can you do? Where you want to use social considerations to lower the rate, how do you treat that? Medicines and things like that, books. So there was a deliberate attempt on how to deal with the perforations, as you call them. On one side, you have the sensitive list, which is the high rates. Then you have the duty exemptions or the remissions to reduce the cost on the other inputs. That was a deliberate policy because you cannot have a perfect CET. So one would have to say that given the model that is applying in the EAC, maybe that's the way to go for now. One needs to make an understanding, saying, going forward, how do we overcome those perforations and have a proper CET, which is what you are saying is the ideal. Maybe we'll need to have certain things in place. We need a common trade policy, because right now those annual exemptions that happen when budgets are set are not the best way. You need to have a systematic management of your common external tariff. That means you need an institutional structure as well to support the management of that common external tariff. And then when you go forward to the national next position of revenue sharing, you then can look at how you look at adjustment costs, in particular what you say, the losers and the winners. Maybe through a revenue sharing formula, you can start talking about balancing how you look at protection in certain areas and how you can compensate the losers, and also how you can have social costs again taken care of. I think in the long run, with a revenue sharing formula and a common revenue collection mechanism and a central management of a trade policy, you can have a perfect CET and look at the adjustment costs internally through the construction of that formula.
But as pointed out earlier, creating more banks may not be the solution. There is a movement recently within the region, especially here in this country, about financial inclusion. And so that movement is the one that needs to be supported, especially the role that the technology is playing in terms of, let's say, for example, M-Pesa. So in that regard, access to finance is a problem, but the way to address it is to emphasize, especially on central bank, to play more on financial inclusion agenda. Now coming to Mr. Quintin, I have sort of a comment and a question. One, you mentioned, as pointed out earlier, that when you make the comparison between the two, the ECOWAS and EAC is a bit stretched. But then I have not read the paper, and here's my question. Between the two, you said there's a tendency to have a limit on the number of exemptions. Which of the two have more exemption? Is it the ECOWAS? Because more exemption tend to be bad in terms of what we are trying to address. Now the last question, you truly point out that whenever there are trade changes or changes to trade policies, you tend to generate, you tend to create classes of losers and winners. Now you make a recommendation that you should, the question is, how do we avoid losers from influencing the decision-making process? Because that's what you said. You said you should make sure that you limit their influence at the decision-making table. And some of these people tend to be more vocal and more powerful. Let me just give an example before I conclude. It was last year, November, in South Sudan. The central bank had an idea of trying to devalue its currency. The idea was well conceived, but the approach was not that right. It was brought to parliament, and there was a public outcry. The central bank backfired, and nothing was done. As of now, the dollar is appreciating again the pound, and the fuel crisis just hit Juba as if it has never hit Juba before. So these losers tend to be more powerful, and to avoid them from having a say at the table of influence is a hard thing. How do you do that? In specifics. Thank you.
Which emphasized the issue of the agreements which have been signed within the region, belonging to more than one customs union, and trying to handle it. I think it brings the issue, and again the practical issues, it brings the issues of handling the tripartite in such a way that they should solve some of those challenges, which is a result of some exemptions which exist in the EAC. My appeal here is for Trademark to not to treat tripartite or EPA to be a lane to the EAC process, because it has effect. Because I've found that sometimes when you discuss with them, say, no, tripartite, we're not touching that one. But it has an effect on what the CET management would look like. The other issue also, Chair, is about competitiveness. I would also request that we should examine exactly why is it that a farm in the region here may be uncompetitive, especially on factors which are outside the control of farms. Take costs like electricity, even transport. What are the costs here? When you have the products coming from India or China, what is the cost of electricity there? our own analysis is that those reduced costs can actually overcome the tax and also transport effects, and they can outcompete you here. So what are we talking about? I'm happy Trademark is making their interventions in such a way that they ask questions that, what is the impact of this intervention? If you are making interventions, see that the impact reduces the cost of doing business significantly to enable you be able to compete effectively. Areas like energy, if we have the region is about 12, 16%, 16 US dollar cents per kilowatt hour. You have Egypt maybe about 2 cents per kilowatt hour. Cement, you will be outcompeted here. So what are we going to do? Possibly we need to see if we are making these investments. The investments should not be in such a way that the output of what they are selling is 12 cents like we have in Bujagali. Possibly what was estimated in Ethiopia to be 4 cents and be brought into the region, we expect it to be about 7 cents, will now make sense. We will now be tackling exactly the competitiveness issues. So I would urge ourselves, especially now when we go, I'm always not a fan of this World Bank ranking and so on, those issues. I think the problems are these ones, not the rank that electricity, you take too long to have it in your premises. Yet, the people who have electricity in their premises are the ones paying more. They don't need to connect. So we need to handle issues like cost of electricity. What is it going to be like? Cost of transport, how are we going to reduce it? So let's have that plan. And then, because those are outside the private sector control, then we handle some things which are inside the private sector control, but they have challenges. Things like finances, technology, the chain, smoothing up the chain, the value chains. And that's why I uphold that the result 3, you call it result 3? SO3, I think will now be handling some of these issues after you have agreed on the policy issues like CET. Thank you.
Issues and how, because without addressing the politics, I don't think we'll be making sense. We've seen that on some of the sectoral issues that have come up, for instance, on the discussions around rice, rather sugar and others. The second issue I think would have wanted to see again when you look at CET and poverty, specific groups coming through, the women, what is the impact on commonly tradable goods by women? This is something we're going to look at more deeply at the Uganda country level, but it would be good to have some kind of broader issues coming through these kind of papers.
Interestingly, I think this reflects the fact that in ECOWAS you have a few more member states, you have 15. So you need more tariff bans in order to accommodate everyone. That's how you would, I would answer that question. More focus on poverty. I take your point. I'll try to address it. I looked at, I was trying to make the point of looking at disaggregated impact, saying, the impact could go either way depending on your context. I could have reviewed studies, actually my colleague here with the literature review, could have reviewed studies focusing more on the aggregate, sort of like economy-wide, how much will GDP grow? I didn't do that. Now, is there a sense for TMEA to keep on supporting EAC, CET reviews? I don't know much about the work of TMEA, to be frankly honest with you, but I would say yes. Simply because, the building of a customs union and a common market makes so much sense in today's world. Negotiating as a WTO during EPAs, for example. It makes a huge difference in terms of how you negotiate a better deal for yourself on the international level to attract FDI, etc. So yeah, I would say it is very important to focus on those micro poverty effects, of course, but without losing sight of the bigger picture. Then I had another question asking that I list out the commodities that undergo exemptions. Very good point. I think that most of the time, if I'm correct, it's agricultural commodities, isn't it? Right? Because they're very political. Food prices are very sensitive issues. And I think when I looked at actually the state of application on the ACCET, what is very interesting is that they're used to bring prices down, right? Most of the time, not to protect industries, but to bring prices down for local consumers. So there again, a very interesting dynamic that tells you a bit about the politics of these exemptions. Poverty effect of exemptions, I take your point. I'll try to address that. Does ECOWAS have more to learn than EAC, or is it the other way around? Actually, I'm not sure. The EAC has been, managing a CET for a long time. So, I would say in that regard, yes. And it's true that ECOWAS hasn't yet implemented the CET, but just, when we did a bit of a legal review, just comparing the texts, how they work, I would say, for example, the fact that there's a limit on the number of exemptions that you can apply per year, that's a pretty good idea. That's not present in the EAC, for example. The duty remission scheme in the EAC, on the text, as soon as, imports don't end up in the regional market, so the inputs you imported don't end up in the regional market, that's also a very good idea. That's not present in ECOWAS. So there again, loads of opportunities for cross-fertilization, if you ask me. Commitment that you need the institutional structure to phase them out, absolutely. I think, integration is a process. You build structures that allow member states to resolve their differences more, better, and so you have less exemptions, absolutely. Revenue sharing formula and adjustment funds, actually that's what the EU does. The revenue collection, I think, goes into a big pot, and part of that money actually goes to industries in distress as a result of the integration process. So I think a great point there. Then we had, yeah, then I think, I really like the comment about the politics behind CET exemptions. I think that's key. I mean, to tell you the entire truth, I'm not really an economist. I'm actually a political economist. So I'm more interested in the way, economic decisions are taken and why. And I think if you don't understand why we see these exemptions, etc., happening, then you won't find a way to resolve them.